Hello, everyone. I can see many people are joining the live stream recording presentation by Dr. Christiane Wolf today. And I'm going to be doing a little introduction here at the beginning. Christiane will then be giving a presentation, which will include some slides and some free-form instruction and information. And we will also have some time at the end for questions. But in addition, Christiane has mentioned that if people are having questions as we go, you can feel free to either use the raise your hand feature or put something in the chat box, and we will kind of keep our eye on it. And if there are, points along the way during the presentation where she can address them directly, she will do that. Then some of the more longer involved questions, we may just wait till the very end when we have a kind of sustained question and answer period. But that's just a little kind of housekeeping for that part. And I'm going to go ahead and start giving the formal introduction. So my name is Ra'el Khan. I'm the director of the USC Center for Mindfulness Science. Thank you very much for joining us today. And I am seeing that there may be an issue with volume, so I'll just try speaking a little louder. I think I do not have the ability to make my microphone any louder than it is. The event today is the first of this academic year and the first of about 7 or 8 that are scheduled. Christiane is a physician and internationally known mindfulness, insight, Vipassana meditation teacher. She was trained as an OB-GYN and has a PhD in psychosomatic medicine from Humboldt University in Berlin, Germany. And she's also the lead consultant and teacher trainer for the National Mindfulness Facilitator Training at the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs. She's a co-author of A Clinician's Guide to Teaching Mindfulness and has just published her new book, Outsmart Your Pain, Mindfulness and Self-Compassion to Help You Leave Chronic Pain Behind. It's this theme in particular that Christiane is going to be sharing with us, amongst other things, I'm sure. And she's also a senior teacher here in Los Angeles at Inside LA, where she lives with her husband and her 3 teenagers. I've known Christiane for about 10 years now through the Inside LA community initially, and later in these last few years as faculty in the process of organizing Center for Mindfulness Science events. I've been felt very lucky that Christiane has been willing to engage with the Center for Mindfulness Science to help set up some projects, scientific research on the mindfulness work that she is doing in the community, she and the other teachers at Inside LA. And she's been gracious to lend her support to the center as a steering committee member as well. So without further ado, I'm going to turn over the floor to you, Christiane, and just really thank you so much for being with us today. I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Ralph, so much. So I just want to check, how is my volume? Is my volume okay? I know, Rael, you probably hear me okay, but I heard you okay too. So if like some people in the chat box could just confirm that volume's great. Okay, cool. Thank you. Very important. All right. So yeah, very happy to be here. It's a little better. Okay. Very happy to be here. And I actually want to start with a short practice. So for me, actually, starting pretty much anything that I do, any meeting, any presentation with a guided meditation, that usually definitely helps me. And I know it usually also helps people because our days are so busy and it's so hard to pause and stop for a moment. So I just want to invite us all in to finding a comfortable posture. Maybe just checking in with your body in this moment and seeing what your body needs right now. And sometimes what it needs is actually standing up or just taking a moment to just stretch. Especially if you've been sitting for a while, you might want to just take a moment and stretch or just twist your spine. And then coming into a posture that is comfortable or is as comfortable as possible right now. Closing the eyes if that feels okay, otherwise just lowering your gaze. And then just noticing where the body is in contact with the ground, the chair. Letting yourself feel the contact with the ground, the support of the ground, of the chair in this moment. And then connecting with the sensations of the breath. Noticing where you actually feel the breath in the body. And maybe making these next few breaths a little bit longer and deeper. In order to put the body and the breath center in your attention right now. Meaning that everything else can move into the background. And when you notice that the mind wanders off, you just gently bring it back. And then just allowing the breath to flow naturally. Still staying with it. And then with the sound of my chimes, we'll be ending this short practice. And then opening your eyes if you had them closed. All right, George, right now I want to share my screen, and right now it says that only the host can share. So I don't think I can share right now. Okay, let me try again.
Yeah, you should have capacity now. Yeah.
Okay, let me see. Oh, there we go. Okay, can you see that?
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've already done this part. So we've already meditated together. And actually, I just stop this here and continue in a moment. So I want to start my presentation with a story that came to my mind as I was preparing for this. Because so much of what we want to work with when we work with pain, whether it's chronic pain or emotional pain, so my focus today will be on chronic pain, so physical pain, because that's the focus of my new book, and that's been my invitation here to share about. And so it is a lot about what kind of meaning we make of our experience. And one thing, so what's the meaning that we make of our experience? And then are we the experience, or are we aware of the experience? And so here's the story that I was thinking of. So when I was doing my residency and during my OBGYN training in Berlin, part of my rotation was, of course, to be in the delivery room. And we had University Hospital, we had a lot of beds there. And that means, like, if you've ever been in a delivery room, or if you've delivered a baby, and especially if you did do that without having an epidural, it hurts, it's painful. And so what we do is it's really intense, we make sounds. We sound, we cry, we might scream when we give birth. And of course, there are different ways, like the sounding is actually something that we want, that supports the whole birthing process. Sounding is something that comes like from the bottom up. Screaming is more something that is like just here and not letting the energy flow. But that's not the point of my talk today. But what I noticed was that I was getting really tense around having often, like at the same time, from different delivery rooms, women scream, women making sounds. It would really get to me. And one thing that I learned there, I think that was one of my colleagues sharing that with me, that she said, you have to learn to not hear that as screams of pain, because as I just said, that sounding can actually be really helpful. You have to learn to listen to that, to hear that just as sounds. And that is something, and at that point, my meditation practice wasn't that evolved, but I had been practicing for a number of years. And that made sense to me in the sense of what we learn with mindfulness, that in the end, it is not about the experience, but what we make from that experience, right? So because if we're thinking about it, so what happens is just something comes into my ears and hits my eardrums. That is a neutral. That has no meaning. It's just that then my brain translates that into meaning, and it makes it into like, oh, this is dangerous, or this is something I need to do about it. And of course, there's probably something in our nervous system when we hear people cry in pain, or what we make the interpretation of that they're crying out in pain. That is really hard for us to listen to. So, but what I learned is I learned to hear it just as sounds. And I hope that doesn't sound callous, because it actually wasn't. But it helped me to just to be more present, being in this constantly activated nervous system state, if that makes sense. So, and then a few years later, or many years later actually, I did a training with Nancy Bardacke. Nancy Bardacke is a midwife from the Bay Area, and she developed a version of the MBSR, the mindfulness-based stress reduction class for people who are pregnant and who are about to give birth, because mindfulness can be really helpful in that whole process. And of course, anybody who's a parent here and is practicing mindfulness, you know that how often that is just a lifesaver. So I trained with her and actually taught her class for a number of years here in Los Angeles. But one thing that really stuck with me, and from here I come back to sharing, I want to share with you here, is that she taught, or what I've learned from her is that she said, pain is the body's way to tell the brain, pay attention. And boy, does that work, right? There's nothing that gets your attention the way that pain does. And this really makes a lot of sense, because that is how our nervous system, or how nervous system developed, of course, to make sure that we are safe, and that anything that would compromise our safety, that would get immediate, like would get our attention. So I want to just outline a little bit of like what pain is. I don't want to go like too deep into the weeds of research. There's one piece of research I want to share with you later on, but here's just like some really important things that I'm sure a lot of you know, but not maybe everybody here on the call. And that is really the work of Lorimer Moseley. He's in Australia, in Adelaide. And he has done a lot of really wonderful research on pain and the meaning of pain. And so really, understanding more the biological processes that underpin pain, and emphasize the difference between acute and chronic pain. And that is something that when I teach people mindfulness around pain, is a lot of people still don't really understand the difference, or understand that there is a big difference between acute and chronic pain. And the way that Lorimer really explains that beautifully is that he says, well, acute pain is protective. If you think about, right, so what's the role is really get your brain's attention. The problem is that chronic pain, because we only have like one pain system, there's not one for acute pain and then we have one for chronic pain, but it's the same. So basically our system is saying like, pay attention, pay attention, pay attention, pay attention. And so to keep it simple is to say acute pain is protective, chronic pain is overprotective. And to be also very clear, right, so also just like this is like psychoeducation for patients, is that there is a difference between nociception and pain. And a lot of people think that nociception means those are pain receptors, but noci actually comes from the Greek word danger. So it's something that the nervous system basically alerts the brain and say like, there could be danger here, what do you think? And then the brain makes the interpretation. And that is another thing that of course is really hard for a lot of people to grasp, because often like there's like all these tests and then the doctor will say like, why don't you see a pain psychologist, or why don't you learn to meditate? And then people really often feel really disrespected and dismissed, because what they're hearing, and they will come and tell me that, or tell you that, but I will say like, well, the doctor said it's all in my head. The thing is that of course all pain is in the head, because the brain makes the interpretation of what actually is considered painful or not, and it becomes better and better at doing that, which of course is part of the problem, and which is really where mindfulness helps us to downregulate that overprotective system. So very important also for pain education is to really make people understand that in acute pain, there's a direct correlation between the amount of tissue damage and the amount of pain that we feel. Like we prick ourselves with a needle, right? That hurts, but not that bad. If I cut vegetables, I cut myself with a knife, big pain. So bigger tissue damage, bigger pain. And that is not the case. There's not such a clear correlation when we're looking at chronic pain, because chronic pain can be triggered by pretty much everything. And then we also know, of course, that catastrophizing is very common. The more we fear something, the more we are afraid of something, the worse our experience usually is of something. And that is regardless whether that is physical pain or not. And then really introducing this concept that with chronic pain, like what we're talking about is a multidimensional phenomenon, and it's like a biopsychosocial approach. And we have this here, this is like from Stanford, so we have this overlapping of the biology, psychological factors, and then of course our social life. And what that means is, like, for anybody suffering from chronic pain or chronic illness, it looks like this. So chronic, basically what that means, anything can trigger chronic pain, can trigger an episode, can make pain worse, or can prolong a flare-up. And as I said earlier, there's actually quite a lot of research showing that in chronic pain, there's quite little correlation between the pain levels and the tissue damage, which that is really important information for the patient, that they understand. Just because there's the pain, right? Because often with that comes avoidance of movement in particular. So if we're, for example, thinking about lower back pain, that means because there's bad pain, I shouldn't move. And then like the amount of movements that we can actually make gets more and more restricted because we're not using the muscles anymore. So here I want to start digging a little bit deeper into mindfulness. So one concept that has been super helpful, whether we're talking about physical pain or whether we're talking about emotional pain, whether we talk about just being stuck or just actually being with our experience, is that concept that we call the triangle of awareness. Of course, it's not a triangle, it's more like overlapping fields, but that we can break down experience in 3 different components. And the first one is the physical sensation. So that basically means anything that comes in through the senses, and that also includes interoceptors. So not just exteroceptors, what comes from the outside, but also interoceptors. So how am I feeling from inside my body? And then we have emotions, and emotions, they of course have overlapping, we feel emotions in the body, most of the emotions, most of the time, but it also of course has a cognitive component. And then, but we really want to separate that from what we call thoughts, story, or meaning. And what's really important, so let's just say, I'll just stop my share here. So let's just say you have, just thinking of a good example. So let's just say let's just use an acute pain, or let's just use a chronic pain since this is about chronic pain. So let's say you suffer from chronic GI problems. So you wake up in the morning or you go about your day and suddenly you feel something in your stomach. So what happens now is, this is unpleasant what you're feeling. So what happens now is really interesting, because you're not just, or our brains, we all do this, so it's not just you obviously. What happens is that our brain immediately, of course, wants to figure out what is going on. So what happens is in that moment that we're not only feeling what's going on in the stomach, but we are also at the same time feeling an emotion around this. It could be frustration, it could be fear, it could be anger, it could be, anything. And then what we have is we have a story about what is going on in that moment. So immediately it goes last time I had this, this happened, or if I have this right now, maybe I can't go to work tomorrow and lose more work days. And so immediately we have this whole field of experience that we call pain. And I use that, or I use the term of, say, like the box that we call pain. And so whenever that comes up, of course it is so unpleasant, we don't want to go anywhere near it. The problem is that then we're making a lot of assumptions, and because it's a box that we label pain, it often feels very big and overwhelming. So what we're doing really with so I'm just looking at the chat box here. So what we're doing now is we are moving the attention to, first of all, so usually when we have pain, what we do is we try to push it away and we try to look in another direction. And that often comes in the form of distractions. We try to distract ourselves from the pain, which, by the way, research shows that distraction works really well for acute pain. It does not work well for chronic pain. So that's basically what the research says. In my experience, though, is I say whatever works, or like whatever works is good for you. So I'm saying more like, if you know you have some distractions that really work for you to distract yourself from the pain, that's great. And like what I see as my role is to introduce like more ways for you, to more tools, that it's not, you don't only have to rely on distractions. So what we do here, so instead of distracting ourselves, we make like this U-turn and we turn towards the experience. And this is like one of the core faculties of mindfulness is curiosity. And curiosity is really not making assumptions. Right? So if you think about like, what does curiosity feels like for you? So we all know, like, if we have pain in the body or something that is unpleasant, pain is unpleasant. If you think about, so what's the experience that you have? What shows up in the body? So there's the pain, but then usually what shows up is resistance, right? Some form of resistance. So what does resistance feel like in your body? So what does this experience of, I do not want to have that experience right now, feel like? It feels tense, doesn't it? So tense. So now if you think about what does curiosity feel like? So if you think about like last time you got really curious about something, what does curiosity feel like? It feels, to me, it feels like more open. So even if I think like when we get curious, so when we're resisting, we kind of move back, we move away. If we're curious, we go like, what is this? So there is this like leaning towards and an openness to learn something maybe that we don't know yet. So that's really what we want. And really one of the core faculties of mindfulness. Can we be curious about the experience instead of thinking I already know what this is? So as I'm doing this with the box that I call pain, and then I look into, in this moment, and maybe you take a moment right now, so we can do this like as a little like thought experiment. So think about a recent, so if you have chronic pain, so that's probably very easy for you. If you don't have chronic pain, you can choose an episode of acute pain, you can choose an emotional pain, you can choose like anything that was unpleasant. And take a moment to call that up. And if you're working with like emotional pain, or maybe somebody said something that was painful, then there might not have been like a physical component or something that came in through the senses. If you work with pain, physical pain, then so just in your experience in that moment, really check. So out of the three, physical sensations, and then the emotions, is there an emotion right now? Or was there an emotion? And then the thoughts or the story that you were telling yourself. So out of these three, Like sometimes I'm also saying, like, imagine this is a pie chart. And so out of these three, which one is the biggest piece right now? And I can't see your hands right now, or your faces for that matter. But in my experience, because I've asked a lot of people and done a lot of, done this with a lot of people, is most often it's actually not the physical pain. More often it's the emotion or it's the story. And that is really helpful. That is really helpful because we have in mindfulness practice tools how to work with challenging emotions, and we have tools how to work with thoughts. So let me just open this again. All right, so are there any questions at this point, or can people still follow me? Just take a moment here, see if there are any questions so far. Yeah, Maya, great question. Can challenging emotions and thoughts help decrease physical pain? The interesting thing is, while more often than not, they actually make it worse. For some people, it is a way, or they think that works, and again, it's not a conscious process, is that it's actually a way to distract ourselves from feeling the actual sensation. Right, so sometimes I'll do a practice with you in a moment where that maybe becomes more apparent, but sometimes people will say like, oh, if I really focus on the physical sensation, it makes it worse. Yeah. And Linda, absolutely, yeah, sometimes it is the physical pain, of course, right? So this is really like, curiosity is really just, can I be open about what is here in this moment? And what our brain does, of course, that is how our brain works. Our brain basically like pulls the data from all the 200 times this has happened before, and then kind of makes an assumption. But we're not checking that assumption. And this is really like one of the core concepts of like how we're constructing pain, or chronic pain is constructed. A lot actually, we know like it can be from memory. And it is like, for example, so you know that there's something like a phantom pain. So people can have pain in a limb that they don't have anymore. And they're like really quite interesting experiments that researchers have come up with, where they can kind of trick your perception into thinking that a rubber limb is your arm, and then they do something to that rubber limb and you feel pain even though that is not your limb. So it's really just, and I love that in a way, because it's just, oh, this is perception, but this is something we can work with. Because that is one of the core tenets, like what we look into is like, so it's not about the experience, but the meaning or the perception that we have of whatever is going on in that moment. All right, so triangle of awareness. And then what of course happens is, and I don't want to go into that here too much, is like out of these, like the ping-ponging, right? So here's the physical sensation, and then I have an emotion, and with that comes the story, which like makes more of the emotion, which like makes the pain worse, right? So, and out of that, it just ping-pongs back and forth, and out of that often comes a behavior. And it might be a reactive behavior. That's just like, oh, I just have to get rid of it, so I do this, and which might not be like in like mindfulness terms really be like a response to what is happening, but more like a reaction, like, oh, this is what I always do. So what we do, coming back to this idea of like, what we do is we become aware of the experience instead of being the experience. And we do this with the 3 parts. That's part of our practice. And of course, this might feel a lot and overwhelming right now. And this is why we call this a practice. We have to do this over and over. And we take things one at a time, right? So say, okay, so now I work with thoughts. and then I work with emotions, and I work with physical sensations, because that is really, as I look into this triangle, which right now I make a circle with my hand, it's not a triangle, so like pie chart, triangle, whatever. So as I work with these different components, I say, okay, so today I work with thoughts, or in this moment, or now the emotions, and I have tools how to work with an emotion. I work with emotions, or with the physical sensations, whatever is most predominant in that moment. So we learn to disidentify with the experience, because that is also something that we know, that our brain will make whatever is happening to us into a story about me. It is my body, my pain, my emotion, my experience. And while that on some level makes a lot of sense, it can also really get into the way. So I will just focus here on, for example, on working with emotions. So you might have heard of the RAIN acronym, very popular acronym in the mindfulness world right now, especially Tara Brach has made that like super well known. She did not come up with that, but she modified it in a really beautiful way. So RAIN acronym is basically a way to learn to disidentify with your emotions, and at the same time then asking the question, like, which brings the self-compassion part in, is what do I need right now? So what we do when we have an emotion, and a strong emotion, a particular emotion that we don't like, if you think about it, so like you can think for a moment about any emotion that is difficult for you to experience, and then try saying to yourself, I'm really anxious, or I'm really frustrated, or I'm really angry, whatever that emotion is. And just notice what happens in your system as you say that. And then we're rephrasing that. And we say, there's a lot of anxiety here. Or this is what anxiety feels like. Or we could also say, like, new favorite way of me saying this, or working with this, is there's a part of me that feels really anxious right now. So how's that landing? So just play with that for a moment in your mind. And what people often say or experience is like there's more distance. It doesn't feel so personally. Ta-da, right? Because with the emotion, if we were really able to say, I am really anxious in this moment, that would be fine. But that's not what we're saying. Or that's maybe we're saying that, but that's not what we mean. Or what it feels like is, I'm an anxious person. I'm an angry person. Always been, always will be. This is a big problem. I don't have a handle on this. And then blah, 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 blah. What is our story around that particular emotion? So what we're doing here is we're comparing like emotions more with weather. So the RAIN acronym, and the RAIN is recognizing, acknowledging, investigating, where is that actually in my system, instead of thinking like, why am I having this and why shouldn't I have this? And then the last step is to not identify. And Tara Brach, she calls that last one nurture. So what do I need right now? What am I doing with this in this moment? Right, so it's more like weather. It's like we don't take weather personally. We might not like it, we don't have to, but it's not who we are. But what we usually do or have done at this point in our lives, we identify with our emotions the way that we identify with our eye color. That's who I am. And that is not helpful, because in that moment, you're not just holding that energy of that emotion that is here right now, just right now, but basically the history of your past and the anticipated future at the same time. So, and we do it a similar way. So like if you're familiar with mindfulness meditation, like we disidentify with our thoughts all the time, right? So I even gave the instructions at the beginning of this talk today. So when you're sitting, you feel your breath, at some point you notice the attention is somewhere else. What do? You notice, that's the identification, like, oh, I'm thinking, or there are thoughts. And then you let go and you come back to your breath. And what we start to see is with thoughts that thinking is something that the brain does, right? It feels personal, but it actually is not. And then I need to excuse me. And then breathe, yes, thank you. Totally. I have like something in my throat. Okay, good reminder for all of us to take a moment to breathe. And let me just go back here. And so we do the same thing with our physical sensations. And we deconstruct that a little bit. And I will actually, as I said, do an exercise with us in a moment. So what the mind does, again, very familiar for you if you've ever meditated, is so where's the mind? Or not just when you meditated, like where is the mind when it's not in the present moment? It goes into the past, rehashing, or it goes into the future, rehearsing. And what often happens when we have pain is it triggers what I call, or what we call, the past or the future pain story. And I want to do a practice with you on that one. All right, so again, just inviting us all to find a posture right now. This is more reflection than a meditation, but the way that we want to do it is we just want to be more in a contemplative space in our system. And you can either bring your like a current pain to mind, or like a recent one. We can use the same example that you just used previously when I asked you to think about something. And then starting to pay attention to what thoughts are about, or what story, or is there a story present about this pain and the past. So the past pain story, meaning what has happened, why do you have this, why you shouldn't have this, what went wrong, what you wish you would have done differently. like all these things, so our thoughts about the past, that's the past pain story. So just taking a moment and really just with kindness and curiosity, noticing what is here, what is present or what was present in that moment. And you could even, if you have something to write close by or you want to jot down some notes on that, you could also do that with some pointers. And then also becoming aware, so how does that make you feel? Like what kind of emotions are coming up as a result of you remembering the past pain story? And now I'm inviting you to release this as best as you can and turning the attention towards any thoughts that are coming up with these physical sensations that are related to the future. So, thoughts about what will happen to this pain? Will it ever go away? Is what I'm doing enough? Who else do I need to check out? What else do I need to do? Can I go to work tomorrow? Will I be able to keep earning money and support myself or my family? Will I be disabled at some point? Right? All these are thoughts about the future pain story. And then noticing what kind of emotions are coming up as you are invested or caught in that future pain story. And then, just for a moment, seeing if you can kind of let the past pain story step aside and the future pain story step aside, and see what is actually here, or what was actually here as physical pain, physical sensations in this moment. Or you could, like, sometimes I like to play a little bit and say, like, so imagine I had a magic wand and I could make your brain for this moment be unable to access either the past nor the future. So if all that you had right now was right now, and right now that means you're listening to this talk right now, and you're sitting here, and just giving yourself this moment and see what happens if that was all that you had just right now. What would that be like, or what would that feel like? And then we'll be ending this practice. And I would love to just get a few shares in the chat box about what did you notice? What was that like? Yeah, present pain story is much lighter. Yeah, couldn't do it. Noticed some grief move through and out my body. Yeah. Maybe a couple more. I found at this moment would be less intense. Oh, pain in other areas came to the forefront. Yeah. 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 So, right, all kind of things, of course, can arise, but again, just like Pauling, often people will say, oh, right now is actually okay. When I'm able to not ruminate or catastrophize or worry, right, then this is doable. And of course, not always. Sometimes it's really like, no, the pain is actually really, really bad. That is why, like, sometimes people, we had that earlier, will say, like, no, I become aware that I distract myself with thinking or planning. Like, what am I going to do? What are the next steps? And that's a way to distract myself from actually feeling the pain. Yeah. So let me just go back here to my screen share. So here's something quite interesting. So I said I would not go too much into the weeds of research, but this is a piece that I find very fascinating right now. And I will basically say what this is about. So what they find, or in the neuroscientists find in research, or found, is that people with chronic pain, there seem to be two areas of the brain that are shrinking as a result of the chronic pain, which are, so one is the reward center, and then one is like the salience network, or that part of the brain that is associated with what we call interoception. And interoception, I mean, for those of you researchers, you probably know this, but interoception has become really a subject of like high interest, like even to the NIH, for funding studies. And so if you don't know what interoception is, so exteroception is like basically what comes in through the senses from the outside, so what we see, what we hear, what we smell. Interoception is what the body feels like from within. So if you notice that like your guts are moving or your bladder is full, that is interoception. If you feel like a tingling in your legs, that is an interoception. Proprioception, so knowing like where your limbs are in space without having to look, that is part of interoception. And of course, what we do is, so if you're familiar with mindfulness practice, you're very aware of the body scan practice. And a body scan practice is a practice of interoception. Basically, what we're doing is like we go through all the different parts of the body and we say like, what's here to feel? What is here to feel? There might be warmth, or there might be moisture, or the position, or pressure, or tingling, like these things. And what happens, which makes a lot of sense, when you have chronic pain, you stop doing that because you don't want to feel that. That is unpleasant. So we stop, it looks like we stop doing interoception. Even more so, like we're already so disembodied, and really like it's hard to feel the body, like even if we're not in chronic pain. So like that is so common. But when we have chronic pain, it's like, why would I want to feel that? I do not want to feel this. And then here's what happens. So I stop feeling it, but I not only stop feeling the pain, what I also stop feeling is the pleasure. The pleasure of like pleasure that comes through exteroception, but also like pleasure just within the body, right? So if you've ever, like if you have kids, or if you've ever watched like children, they're just so embodied, and I think they really enjoy being in their bodies, like before the whole like the hurting and the shaming and all of that happens, right? And we lose that. And so what we lose, and that is also something that chronic pain patients will tell you over and over, it feels like their joy has left my life. And we believe that really part of that is because we stop checking in. So part of our practice of mindfulness practice really is, again, is like this U-turn, is turning towards the experience. Because what happens, I can't remember if I put that slide in here. Oh, so that's the reprogramming. So, because here's another piece. So if you think about how do people describe their pain when they have bad pain? So like, let's say you have like, you have chronic pain and somebody knows that and they say like, so how's the pain today? And you go like, oh, the pain is killing me, or it's horrible. If you think about that, that is not a sensation, right? That's an interpretation. And so what it does is like because you're actually not checking in anymore, you have a sense it's bad today, but we're not really feeling the pain in this like mindful, maybe even friendly turning towards kind of way. And then often what happens is that we are not checking in when the pain is not bad, because the mind is so like, we feel it when it's really bad, and it's just like, oh, it's bad. And then we're kind of go over the moments where it feels okay, or okay-ish, or less, and the next time we feel it, it's bad again, because that's like, we can't avoid feeling it. And when we keep doing that, basically, if we're only aware when it's really bad, then our brain makes the assumption is that, oh, it's always bad, which is like really one of the exercises that we have people do, is say like, can you notice when it's not there? Well, people will say it's always there. It is almost never always there. And that is part of like, can you be curious? Can you notice when it's not there? And then what happens, like this whole concept or perception that I have about my pain starts to shift. And then, of course, part of what we also do is really we try to reprogram our sense of pleasure, of pleasant moments, because we already know that this is hard for anybody. So even if you don't have chronic pain, we have this negativity bias, and we need to really intentionally look for something that is pleasant or that is joyful. So I'm just looking at time, so I have a couple more minutes here. So I don't want to, actually, I have the 3 components of self-compassion listed here, but that is very easy for you to actually look up. So I will just actually get out of here and just say a little bit about self-compassion and chronic pain. So self-compassion is attending to our experience, our painful experience for that matter, the way that we would attend to a friend's painful experience. And there's usually quite a big difference between how we would take care of a friend that's in pain compared to how we take care of our own pain. So for most of us, it's quite easy to be very kind, very compassionate with a friend, say, oh my gosh, that's so hard, or I'm so sorry you have such a hard day. We're not talking to ourselves in the same way. That is really a training that most of us need to do and really learn over time, because for whatever reason, most of us have learned that like being kind to ourselves is nothing valuable, or it's weak, or it's like we can't motivate ourselves that way. So it can be really interesting to pay attention to how are we talking to ourselves when it's hard. And another thing that we're often really afraid of is we think we are then drowning in self-pity. And so I say a few words about the difference between self-compassion and self-pity. Self-pity is a contraction around one person, me. Like, poor me, woe is me, why does it happen to me? It shouldn't have happened to me, this is really bad. And it's all about me, but what it does is we are feeling even more alone and more disconnected, which of course is one of the signs of chronic pain, because there are chances that you don't really know anybody who has the same amount of pain that you have, or the condition that you have. So there is this sense of isolation, which is really confounded by self-pity. Self-compassion actually does the opposite. So first, the 3 steps of Kristin Neff's self-compassion is, the first is, can we acknowledge it? So that's mindfulness, right? So it says like, yes, there's pain. Yes, this hurts. Just the acknowledging. And we really know how good that feels if like a friend comes and just say, I see you're in pain. And often just that acknowledgement lets something in us melt and go like, oh yeah, thank you for seeing me. It's so hard to be strong and appear normal, like all these things, right? And somebody saying that, I see you, that makes a big difference. And then the kindness that really comes with that. And then like the part that is really like where it is connecting to other people is that instead of saying like, this is just me, what we kind of do internally, we kind of call to mind. So we say, yeah, this is what it feels like. Let's just use back pain. This is what it feels like to have chronic back pain and feel so stuck and so helpless with that and so frustrated. That is what that feels like. And then in our mind's eye, we're kind of recalling that we're not the only person who feels that way. And we're not doing that in a way to diminish our pain, but this is really what we do here is like, so we all know the power of when we suffer, when we feel in this stuck place and somebody goes like, oh yeah, me too. I actually have that too. And then again, something in us can soften and say, oh, thank you for saying that. I'm not alone. And so in a way, we're doing that internally, reminding ourselves that there are all these other people who know exactly what that feels like, because they have it too, or they've had it in the past. And that really, we can practice that. So just connecting this internal, like, I'm not alone with that. And self-compassion is, I think, really one of the core practices that really help with chronic pain, because it's like, it is hard. We do not know if this will ever go away. And so when we have these moments of frustration and overwhelm, and it's just too much, and all the work that takes, and all of this, and we can't go out, and we're grieving what we have lost because of things we can't do anymore, and all the uncertainty, and then they're like, and we go like, mindfulness, mindfulness, I need to be mindful. Sometimes we cannot be mindful. Whether pain is so bad that all we can do is just like lie down, turn the lights off, and be very, very still, and there's not even the power there to be mindful. But we can put a hand on our chest and go like, this is really hard right now. So we can still invite, or practicing to invite, a sense of just not abandoning ourselves in a moment of pain. And that, of course, is really part of our practice that we're doing. So I think I will end like the official part of my talk here. That was a lot of information, and I'm sure there are questions. So I'm just looking at the chat box here.
Christiane, can I just say a
Please.
few words? Thank you so
Yes,
much
please. Thank you.
for that presentation. And I feel you have kind of shared the space of mindfulness and compassion with us all through that presentation, and really appreciate it. As someone who stays especially in touch with the scientific findings, I really appreciated the kind of going through some of the kind of physiology of pain and the relationship with brain-mind perception. And I think it's worth saying, and you may have something to say about that as well, but as a neuroimaging researcher, you know, that there, and we've had, you know, Fadel Zaidan has presented for our center in the past.
I know. Yeah.
Was there for that, I remember.
Yeah.
And Fadel is one of about 4 folks internationally who've done some really systematic, in-depth neuroimaging studies of pain, and the findings there are just so complementary to the description that you're presenting to us. And just to kind of bring it into focus briefly, is that there's actually an increase through mindfulness practices. There's an increase in the interoceptive networks activation from pain, which is part of the so-called pain matrix, those areas of the brain that tend to light up in association with acute pain. So there's a decrease in anticipatory activation of those networks when people are knowing they're about to receive a painful stimulus in a scanner, because people are able to stay more in the moment through these kind of practices, but a decrease in the stimulus evoked kind of experience of pain in combination with an increase of the activation of the salience network, the interoceptive network. So it's not that your body and mind brain interaction are causing a decrease in your kind of early perception of the raw experience of pain. It's actually that you're experiencing more of that relative to your kind of baseline state. But in turning towards it and experiencing more at that early level, there's this process of kind of a decoupling with those later cognitive and evaluative aspects of the pain that you were talking about. Those parts of the engagement of the brain, you know, seem to be kind of shut down, relatively speaking. So by turning attention to and really attending to the senses and the raw experience, there seems to be a key to kind of allowing the mind to kind of decouple its kind of going into the suffering aspect that's associated with all the interpretation, etc. So, you know, that's a finding that isn't just coming from one lab. It's repeated, and there are not a lot of findings in the brain about mindfulness that are repeated across different groups over and over, but that is one. And it's
Yeah.
kind of, I think it's just so appropriate that you're presenting on this topic for us because of the fact that, the scientific study of mindfulness in some ways was really kind of put on the map also by the MBSR, development of
Yes.
MBSR technique, which, one of the first things John Kabat-Zinn noticed was like folks with chronic pain seems to be especially helped through this practice. There's some the questions I want to get to, but I do want to ask just before we get into some of those specific ones, and please, for everyone, bring up any additional questions, comments you have. We'll come to them one by one here. But can you tell us a little bit about, Christiane, what really brought you to write the book, this Outsmart Your Pain book, and what audience you had in mind? Why
Yeah.
this book at this time?
Yeah, so for me, just because my background is as a physician, and I worked in gynecological oncology, so lots and lots and lots of pain. And back then I was already meditating, so I was already a meditator, but I was not teaching that because secular mindfulness back then didn't exist. So that was my personal practice. I always really wished I could help folks with that. And so that just made a lot of sense as I was getting into teaching mindfulness, thinking like, so how can my patients benefit from that? And then quite early on here in LA, I started teaching classes for people with chronic pain and chronic illness. And it made such a huge difference to them. And so then, and I noticed then as mindfulness or secular mindfulness was getting more popular, that a lot of people didn't really know how to talk about mindfulness. And especially in the medical community, there was very little knowledge of how useful that actually could be. So my very first intention of this book was like, I wanted to make a pamphlet for physicians. So something like, this is what mindfulness is, this is how I can help with chronic pain, ABC, like here are the steps and here are some resources, and put that on folks' desks so that whenever they had a patient with pain, which like we know, that's just like whatever, like 1/3 of our population, right? Here's where you can find out more. And then from that, it evolved into something that is still, so my intention really was make it short, make it readable. Like people do not want to read like, I don't know, like 2,000 pages on like every research study that has ever been published on chronic pain, right? And that's not what people want. They want something that is easy to understand. They want to practice with that. And so this is how I structured the book. So it's like 20 chapters, each with a particular topic, and then a guided practice, which people can also download and then on my website and then really practice with that. So that was really my intention. And then what was interesting, so the book is called Outsmart Your Pain. And I like afterwards I thought like I should have called it Outsmart Your Brain, because it really feels that's really what we're doing, right? So, and again, like I touched briefly on that earlier. So like our brain means really well with chronic pain. It tries to detect pain earlier and earlier. It tries to keep us safe. But what happens, unfortunately, with that, it becomes better and better at detecting pain. And that means, we know that for a lot of people with chronic pain, they start to feel sensations as pain that somebody who has not chronic pain actually does not feel as pain. And that's just tragic. And that is really something like where we are using these practices to kind of desensitize that again, or basically tell the brain, we're okay, nothing dangerous is happening here. So it's kind of outsmarting our brain, and with that outsmarting the pain. Yeah
It makes a lot of sense. I think that's a kind of a framework that can be used to help explain a lot of the benefits that can be gained through these kind of practices. One thing that's kind of directly relevant to your interest, your initial impulse to really speak to clinicians about this came as a question answer early on, kind of in the midway of your talk, from Pranav Shah, saying, in my work with chronic pain patients, I've noticed that acceptance of the pain and letting go of anger or forgiveness are two of the most difficult steps for a lot of people. Any suggestions on how to work with those?
Yes. Yeah, and then so I'll say a few words about that. And actually, I have a chapter on anger, and I have a chapter on resentment, and I have a forgiveness practice in the book. So, like, if you want to look up, then read more about that. That could be a helpful resource. So, what's very interesting. So, you're probably familiar with Dr. Sano's work and back pain, and so his core principle was that basically chronic pain is caused by suppressed anger. And a lot of people claim that they really got rid of their pain by journaling and processing unconscious anger, making it conscious, moving it through, and then letting go of it. And there seems to be, and again, like, people love him or hate him, seems to be like quite two camps. But what I've often noticed is that when people are angry, they notice a correlation with that there's more inflammation in their body, and often they have more flare-ups. And so what I find helpful is just like, can you make people again like curious about that? Basically say, like, if you notice there's a lot of frustration or you're really angry about something, like, what happens to your pain at the same time? And do that in this, again, like curious, friendly way, just like a friendly scientist would be like, is there any correlation? And then to also know that with forgiveness practice is a practice that often happens over years. So it's not like I decide this, I'm over this and I'm forgiving this. That's not how that works. But it's repeatedly over time. And so just like with mindfulness practice, it's the intention and then practicing it over time without needing an immediately release. So just saying, like, well, when we're going to the gym, we're not expecting like the first day to lift heavy weights, but we go over and over again, and we know that this will grow over time. And for me, really, and that's the way that I'm structured, is education, psychoeducation goes a long way with me. So if you can't explain to me why I should be doing something, I probably won't do it. So I think that is also really helpful.
One of the other questions that has come up that I think is very relevant in the real world comes from Kara. She mentioned, I found that people with chronic pain can be very dismissive of mindfulness, as if the offering itself is disrespectful of the severity of pain. And are there any good resources you can recommend for people?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yes, that I think, Kara, that really comes back to what I said earlier, that like there is unfortunately this thing, you have pain, you go to the doctor, they do all these tests and they say we can't really find anything. Go see a pain psychologist. And what people really find that's dismissive, because what they hear is like, it's you're making this up. All pain is real pain. That is really, really important, number one. And number two is really, if you look into the resource, so like thank you for finding the right website for Tame the Beast. So that is, that start with that. They're like, Lorma is he's a hilarious speaker. So just to like send some of his videos, and it's really this understanding is like, if you can have phantom pain, pain is in your brain. Pain is not in the periphery, right? And it is very complex. And there are all these things. So like one thing I haven't even touched on here because it's such a tricky topic is we also know, for example, that people who have adverse childhood experiences have a multiplied chance to have chronic pain and chronic illness later in life. And that's not their fault. It's just something like the body and the mind are not separate, right? So it's not just like we're not cars, like there's something broken here. And sometimes it is like, okay, we have a broken bone or something, but overall it's really more complex and more complicated. But that is actually a good thing, because that's something we can work with. And we're not just relying on the surgeon to kind of fix our back, because that might not happen. And there are so many other ways how we can really work with the pain from these multiple angles. So I hope that's helpful. Yeah, I'm looking here. So yeah, Bruce, totally. Yes. And that is also something I also really want to make a plug here. So when we come at a roadblock, for example, with forgiveness practice or grief is a really huge emotion that people really struggle with because acknowledging or allowing the grief often feels like giving up, or it says like, oh, I'm giving up whatever I'm grieving for good. So there's a lot of fear, a lot of sometimes even like magical thinking about this. And sometimes it can helpful really to get help, to say like I want, like maybe you have a good friend, maybe you can talk with your partner, but for a lot of people it's just like work with a therapist, find a good therapist. And sometimes it's just like somebody or mindfulness practitioner, mindfulness teacher to help you hold that, right? And that is often actually also really helpful, like somebody there who can witness what you're holding, so that it doesn't feel like, oh, here's again something that I have to do by myself, which of course that's what many of us have experienced all our lives. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, you're muted.
One other one that's come up in the Q&A section from Lisa Schwiers. I'm sorry if I'm not catching your name correctly. What if pain alerts us to a serious medical issue and we try to outsmart it to our detriment?
Oh yeah, no. This is like, we want to be commonsensical. I'm not saying like you have a pain and you're not paying attention to that because you're so good at meditating it away. No. I'm not saying that. So like if there's a pain, please go check it out. Right? That's absolutely what we want. And we know that sometimes you need to see several specialists, because that's unfortunately something else that a lot of people are misdiagnosed. And right, so this idea, I don't know what it is. And there's also like all these pain syndromes that are really hard to grasp because they have many different manifestations. So of course you want to make sure it's not something just physical, because of course that also exists. But I assume that you've done this and you might continue doing this and you keep doing this at the same time and see what happens.
Yeah, that's great. And I can see that we're coming to the end of our time, but Indy Singh has put his hand up. So I just want to see if we can allow Indy to talk and maybe have a question we want to pose, and let's see if this works.
Wonderful. Yeah, it works. Thank you. Wonderful presentation. I'm glad you had to take that breath. So we all had to take that breath.
Thanks for the reminder. Yeah, that's why we practice in community, to remind each other.
That was beautiful. It was perfect, actually. My question for you is this. I personally am really interested in the power of laughter, and a lot of what I do is stems from that. Have you done any research, or what is your knowledge about how laughter affects pain, and how that whole connection and association?
That is a fascinating question. And I have to say, I have not looked into the research, but what I know is that, of course, that like laughter brings a lot of like energy and connection into the body. So I would assume that that is kind of what happens in the body on a physiological level, and that is really good medicine for pain as well.
Well, I'm always available if you need somebody to be a laughter experimenter. I could bring that into people's chronic pain base. So let me know. I'm a professional laughter creator.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much. Thanks, Indy.
Yeah, with that, I think we need to start wrapping up to respect everyone's time. Really, thank you so much, Christiane, for sharing all of this with us again today. And I also feel the need to just comment on the wonderful Zen piece of art you have behind you. which it's wonderful in its own right, but it's just so appropriate as the this
Yes.
USC themed event that we're doing, that it kind of has the USC colors, and I started to think, wow, that would be a good logo for our group. Um,
Yeah.
so
It's called Miracles of Each Moment, that Enzo. So that's
uh
yeah.
very
So
nice.
yeah, thank you.
Um,
Yeah.
just a couple of brief words regarding our next couple of talks. Some of the presenters we'll have coming up include Amishi Jha, Nicholas Van Dam, Sona Demijan. Speaking in the next couple of months, you'll see these coming out over the listserv. We'll also be sending out info in a couple of days here on a pilot grant for students and postdocs at USC for some pilot funding we as a center are able to provide this year for research projects. And two of our steering committee members, Randy Semple and Matthew Goodman, will be giving a 2-session kind of workshop in either January or February. We're going to send the dates out soon on how to conduct a mindfulness research project for beginners, just to help give people some skills about how to engage in these kinds of research projects around mindfulness. So I hope you've all enjoyed the presentation today, and just thank you so much again, Christiane, for being with us.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. And thank you everyone for joining. Really appreciate it. Thank you.